Dear learners, welcome to this module. The topic of this module is social influence. Social influence is a common feature of everyday life, and all of us either try to influence others or influenced by others many times each day. Social influence generally looks at how individual thoughts, actions and feelings are influenced by social groups. It is a major topic in social psychology. The studies related to social influence focus on ways in which behavior is influenced by outside factors, and this influenced behavior could be a behavior of a whole group or a discrete individual. As we grow up, our beliefs, emotions and behavior are shaped as well as changed with social interaction which happens on day-to-day basis, either directly or indirectly. The social interaction thus leads to social influence, which is defined as the effect of other people on our attitude. Thus, social influence can be seen as a technique through which attitudes are formed as well as attitudes are changed. Social influence can take place through conformity, compliance and obedience. The module has following objectives: to understand the meaning of social influence, to learn the three main areas of social influence, that is conformity, compliance and obedience. Let us see the meaning of social influence. Social influence is the process by which an individual's thoughts, feelings and behaviors are affected by other people. This influence can be exerted through conformity, persuasion, peer pressure, normative influence, informational influence or imitation. Social influence is defined as the change in an individual's thoughts, feelings, attitudes or behaviors that results from interaction with another individual or group. It refers to the change in behavior that one person causes in another intentionally or unintentionally. As a result, the changed person perceives himself in relationship to the influencer, other people and society in general. Social influence can also be defined as the process by which individuals make real changes to their feelings and behaviors as a result of interaction with others who are perceived to be similar, desirable or expert. People adjust their beliefs with respect to others to whom they feel similar in accordance with psychological principles such as balance. Individuals are also influenced by the majority. When a large portion of an individual's referent social group holds a particular attitude, it is likely that the individual will adopt it as well. Additionally, individuals may change an opinion under the influence of another who is perceived to be an expert in matter at hand. French and Raven provided an early formalization of the concept of social influence in their discussion of the basis of social power. For French and Raven, agents of change included not just individuals and groups, but also norms and roles. They viewed social influence as the outcome of the exertion of social power from one of five bases: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, expert power or referent power. Social influence refers to how one can be influenced or affected by others. Generally, there are two types of influence. They are as follows. Normative influence. It is related to the act of going along with the crowd in an effort to be liked and to be accepted. For example, a person can treat women at the workplace as equal colleagues due to the norms at the workplace, but in home he may have a different attitude towards his wife or sister, where the patriarchal and regressive attitude is reflected in his action. The second one is informational influence. When we go along with the crowd because we think the crowd knows more than we do, especially in ambiguous situations when we do not have a clear idea of what to do, and in the crisis situation when people do not have time to think what to do. Next, we are going to see areas of social influence. Conformity. It is the most common and pervasive form of social influence. Conformity is the process by which an individual's attitudes, beliefs and behaviors are conditioned by what is conceived to be what other people might perceive. This is a type of social influence in which individuals change their attitudes or behaviors in order to adhere to existing social norms. This influence occurs in both small groups and society as a whole, and it may be the result of subtle unconscious influences or direct and overt social pressure. Conformity also occurs by the implied presence of others or when other people are not actually present. For example, people tend to follow the norms of society when eating or watching television, even when they are at home by themselves. People often conform from a desire to achieve a sense of security within group, that is typically a group that is of similar age, culture, religion or educational status. Any unwillingness to conform carries with it the very real risk of social rejection. In this respect, conformity can be seen as a safe means of avoiding bullying or deflecting criticism from peers. Conformity is often associated with adolescence and youth culture, but it affects humans of all age. Although peer pressure may be viewed as a negative trait, conformity can have either good or bad effects depending on the situation. Driving safely on the correct side of the road is a beneficial example of conformity. Conformity influences the formation and maintenance of social norms and allows society to function smoothly and predictably. Because conformity is a group phenomenon, such factors as group size, unanimity, cohesion, status, prior commitment and public opinion all help to determine the level of conformity an individual will display. Let us see Asch experiments on conformity. The Asch conformity experiments were a series of psychological experiments conducted by Solomon Asch in 1951. The experiments revealed the degree to which a person's own opinion are influenced by those of a group. Asch found that people were willing to ignore reality and give an incorrect answer in order to conform to the rest of the group. Asch in 1951 devised what is now regarded as a classical experiment in social psychology, whereby there was an obvious answer to a line judgment task. The experimental procedure are as follows. Asch used a lab experiment to study conformity, whereby 50 male students from Swarthmore College in USA participated in a vision test. Using a line judgment task, Asch put naive participants in a room with 7 Confederates. The Confederates had agreed in advance what their response would be when presented with the line task. The real participants did not know this and was led to believe that the other 7 Confederates were also real participants like themselves. Each person in the room had to state aloud which comparison line A or B or C was most like the target line. The answer was always obvious. The real participants sat at the end of the row and gave his or her answer last. There were 18 trials in total and the Confederates gave the wrong answer on 12 trials, and that is called the critical trials. Asch was interested to see if the real participants would conform to the majority view. Asch experiment also had a control condition where there were no Confederates, only a real participants. The findings of the experiments are as follows. Asch measured the number of times each participants conformed to the majority view. On average, about 1/3, that is 32% of the participants who were placed in this situation went along and conformed with the clearly incorrect majority on the critical trials. Over the 12 critical trials, about 75% of participants conformed at least once and 25% of participants never conformed. In the control group with no pressure to conform to Confederates, less than 1% of participants gave the wrong answer. It was concluded through these findings that why did the participants conform so readily? When they were interviewed after the experiment, most of them said that they did not really believe their conforming giving answers but had gone along with the group for fear of being ridiculed or thought peculiar. A few of them said that they did believe the group's answer were correct. Ash went on to conduct further experiments in order to determine which factors influenced how and when people conform. He found that conformity tends to increase when more people are present. However, there is little change once the group size goes beyond 4 or 5 people. Conformity also increases when the task becomes more difficult. In the face of uncertainty, people turn to others for information about how to respond. Conformity increases when other members of the group are of higher social status. When people view the others in the group as more powerful, influential or knowledgeable than themselves, they are more likely to go along with the group. Conformity tends to decrease, however, when people are able to respond privately. Research has also shown that conformity decreases if people have support from at least one other individual in a group. Apparently, it was found out that people conform for two main reasons. One is normative influence, because they want to fit in within the group, and because they believe the group is better informed than they are, that is informational influence. Social psychology research in conformity tends to distinguish between two varieties. One is informational conformity and the other one is normative conformity. Informational social influence. Social proof is a psychological and social phenomenon wherein people copy the action of others in choosing how to behave in a given situation. The term was coined by Robert Cialdini in his 1984 book Influence, Science and Practice, and the concept is also known as informational social influence. Informational social influence means social influence based on the desire to be correct. It means other people's action and opinion defines social reality for us, and we use these as a guide for our own actions and opinion. This basis for conformity is known as informational social influence because it is based on our tendency to depend on others as a source of information about many aspects of the social world. Social proof is considered prominent in ambiguous social situations where people are unable to determine the appropriate mode of behavior and is driven by the assumption that the surrounding people possess more knowledge about the current situation. The effects of social influence can be seen in the tendency of large groups to be conformed. This is referred as herd behavior, although social proof reflects a rational motive to take into account the information possessed by others. Formal analysis shows that it can cause people to converge too quickly upon a single distinct choice, so that the decisions of the even larger group of individuals may be grounded in very little information. Social proof is one type of conformity. When a person is in a situation where they are unsure of the correct way to behave, they will often look to others for clues concerning the correct behavior. When we conform because we believe that others' interpretation of an ambiguous situation is more accurate than ours and will help us to choose an appropriate course of action, it is known as informational social influence. This is contrasted with normative social influence, wherein a person conforms to be liked or accepted by others. Social proof is more powerful when being accurate is more important and when others are perceived as especially knowledgeable. In 2020, a young scientist from Poland, Michał Klisowski, proved that this phenomenon also applies to interaction with artificial intelligence. His results shows a new AI-proof mechanism. Artificial intelligence that people have more and more contact with is a new source of information about how to behave and what decisions to take. Normative social influence. This is a type of social influence that leads to conformity. It is defined in social psychology as the influence of other people that lead us to conform in order to be liked and accepted by them. The power of normative social influence stems from the human identity as a social being with a need for companionship and association. Normative social influence involves a change in behavior that is deemed necessary in order to fit in a particular group. The need for a positive relationship with the people around lead us to conformity. This fact often leads to people exhibiting public compliance but not necessarily private acceptance of the group's social norms in order to be accepted by the group. Social norms refers to the unwritten rules that govern social behavior. These are customary standards for behavior that are widely shared by members of a culture. In many cases, normative social influence serves to promote social cohesion. When a majority of group members conform to social norms, the group generally becomes more stable. This stability translates into social cohesion, which allows group members to work towards a common understanding or good, but also has the unintended impact of making the group members less individualistic. Minority influence and conformity. Although conformity generally leads individuals to think and act more like groups, individuals are occasionally able to reverse this tendency and change the people around them. This is also known as minority influence, a special case of informational influence. Minority influence is most likely when people are able to make a clear and consistent case for their point of view. If the minority fluctuates and shows uncertainty, the chance of influence is small. However, if the minority makes a strong, convincing case, it will increase the probability of changing the beliefs and behavior of the majority. Minority members who are perceived as experts, are high in status, or have benefited the group in the past are also more likely to succeed. Another form of minority influence can sometimes override conformity effects and lead to unhealthy group dynamics by creating negative emotional climate that interferes with healthy group functioning. They can be avoided by careful selection procedures and managed by reassigning them to positions that require less social interact. The next area of social influence is compliance. In psychology, compliance refers to the act of responding favorably to an explicit or implicit request offered by others. The request may be explicit, such as a direct request for donation, or implicit, such as an advertisement promoting its product without directly asking for purchase. In all cases, the target recognizes that he or she is being urged to respond in a desired way. To study the compliance profession from the inside, Robert Cialdini joined training programs of different compliance professions like sales, advertising, public relation, etc., and started the participant observation. He found that some principles are commonly used to increase the probability of successful compliance, including reciprocation, credibility, liking or friendship, scarcity, authority, commitment, and social validation. Let us see one by one in detail. Reciprocation. Based on the social norm, treat others as you would expect to be treated. When someone does us a favor, it creates an obligation to accept any reasonable request he or she might make in return. We feel a motivation to reciprocate. For instance, if someone does something for you, then you feel more obligated to do something for them. Failing to respond leads to violation of our obligation to reciprocate and bears the risk of social sanction. Guilt arousal produces an increase in compliance. People who are induced to guilt are more likely to comply with the request, such as making a phone call to save native trees or donating blood. Credibility. The source of request will also affect whether we comply or not. If the source is an expert with knowledgeable abilities or skills, that is more credible, we would respect the request more and would be more likely to comply. This principle issued as a marketing strategy where they put on white lab coats, which from a consumer's point of view will symbolizes authority, liking or friendship. People are more likely to say yes to those they know and like because of the social exchange theory, which states that human relationships are formed by using a subjective cost benefit analysis and the comparison of alternatives. Thus, complying with the person we like certainly is more favorable. This principle is used by salesmen all over the world. The principle of liking is common within neighborhoods. Neighbors selling and buying things from each other. When you feel that you trust a person, you feel more obliged to buy the thing that they are selling. Scarcity. The scarcity effect refers to the influence of perceived scarcity on the subjective desirability of an object. Individuals do not want to be left alone without an item. A consumer often infers value in a product that has limited availability or is promoted as being scarce. The idea of limited edition, which can be seen all over the world, is based on the principle of scarcity. When we see that an object is limited, we feel the urge to buy them in order to not to be left out. This also relates to the key explanation to one of the fundamental concepts in economics, supply and demand. Commitment. Commitment to a store or a company induced by loyalty cards or bonuses can make it harder for a person to change where they shop or what they purchase. The next principle is authority. In general, we are more willing to comply with requests from someone who holds legitimate authority or simply appears to do so. The next principle is social validation. Social validation is also called as principle of conformity and consensus. Social validation in compliance is a phenomenon in which people are more willing to take a recommended step if they see evidences that many others, especially similar others, are taking it. The human need to fit in is very strong and tends to make us comply in order to be a part of the majority. 4 compliance strategies. There are 4 compliance strategies. Compliances is known to be enhanced by a number of situational manipulations. They are foot in the door technique, door in the face technique, low ball technique, ingratiation. The first technique is foot in the door technique. It is a compliance tactic that involves getting a person to agree to a large request by first setting them up by having that person agreeing to a modest request. For example, when you visit the food court of local shopping mall, are you ever approached by people offering you free samples of food? If so, why do they do this? The answer is very simple. They know that once you have accepted this small free gift or offering, you will be more willing to buy something from that shop. This is the basic idea behind an approach for gaining compliance known as foot in the door technique. Basically, this involves inducing target person to agree to a small initial request and then making a larger request, the one desired all along. The next technique is door in the face technique. It is a persuasion method. Compliance with the request of concern is enhanced by first making an extremely large request that the respondent will obviously turn down with a metaphorical slapping of a door in the persuader's face. The respondent is more likely to agree to a second, more reasonable request than the first extreme request. Cialdini in the year 2001 suggests that this is a form of reciprocity, that is, the induced sharp negative response to the first request creates a sense of debt or guilt that the second request offers to clear. Alternatively, a reference point or framing constructual may explain this phenomenon. as the initial bad offer sets a reference point from which the second offer looks like an improvement. Door in the face technique is a tactic or a procedure for gaining complaints in which requesters begins with a large request, and when this is refused, retreat to a similar smaller request, the one they actually desire all along. A related procedure for gaining complaints is known as the "that's not all" technique, a technique for gaining complaints in which requesters offer additional benefits to target person before these person have decided whether to comply with or reject specific request. The next technique is low ball technique. The low ball is a persuasion and selling technique in which an item or service is offered at a lower price than is actually intended to be charged, after which the price is raised to increased profits. A successful low ball relies on the balance of making the initial request attractive enough to gain agreement while not making the second request so outrageous that the customer refuses. In such instances, an initial commitment seems to make it more difficult for individuals to say no. Even the condition that led them to say yes in the first place have now been changed. Low ball procedure is a technique in which an offer or deal is changed to make it less attractive to the target person after the person has accepted it. Ingratiation. This is another technique for gaining complaints in which requesters first induce target persons to like them and then attempt to change the person's behavior in some desired manner. Let us discuss the third area of social influence, that is obedience. Obedience is a form of social influence where an individual acts in response to a direct order from another individual who is usually an authority figure. It is assumed that without such an order, the person would have not acted in this way. Obedience occurs when you are told to do something, whereas conformity happens through social pressure. Obedience involves a hierarchy of power and status. Therefore, the person giving the order has a higher status than the person receiving the order. Obedience is the act of obeying orders from others. Forms of obedience. Obedience is the tendency to follow orders given by authority figure. This can be explained by Milgram's agency theory, which states that we are in either one of two states. Form of human obedience includes obedience to laws, obedience to social norms, obedience to a monarch, government, organization, religion or church, obedience to God, obedience to self-imposed constraints such as a vow of chastity, obedience of a spouse or child to a husband or wife or to parent respectively, obedience to management in the workplace. Let us see the experimental studies of human obedience. Obedience has been extensively studied by psychologists since the Second World War. The Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment are the most commonly cited experimental studies of human obedience, while the Hoffling Hospital experiment was an early field experiment. The Milgram experiments, the first of which was carried in the year 1961, where the earliest investigation of the power of authority figures as well as the length to which participants would go as a result of their influence. Milgram's result showed that, contrary to expectations, a majority of civilian volunteers would obey orders to apply electric shocks to another person until they were unconscious or dead. Prior to this experiment, most of Milgram's colleagues had predicted that only sadists would be willing to follow the experiments. Obedience is a basic human trait and is a deeply ingrained behavior. Some form of obedience is a requirement for function in modern society. The Milgram shock experiment proves these characteristics. The experiment first took place at Yale University and eventually involved over 1000 participants from all walks of life. Two individuals were to enter a psychology lab and take part in a study of memory and learning. One of them was to be the teacher and other the student. The student was instructed to earn a list of word pairs, and whenever the student made a mistake would receive an electric shock of increasing intensity. However, the focus of the experiment is the teacher. The teacher watches the student being strapped into place and then taken to a shock generator. The shock generator features switches ranges from 15 to 450 volts in 50 volt increments. If the student gets the answer correct, the teacher is to move on to the next problem. If the answer is wrong, the teacher is to shock the students beginning with 15 volts. The teacher, being the focus of the experiment, does not know that the student is not really being shocked and that the student is really an actor. Each time the student answers incorrectly and is shocked, he pretends to be shocked. As the teacher watches the student being tortured by the electric shocks, he continues to follow the orders he was instructed. The experiment proves that obedience is something humans teach one another and follows through with. Milgram thinks the problem lies in the structure of society. People are just following orders of superiors and are not directly responsible for his or her actions. Also, Milgram himself had already conducted several studies which had shown that obedience tended to increase with the prestige of the authority figure. He identified many factors that increase obedience. Milgram found that subjects were more likely to obey in some circumstances than others. Obedience was highest when commands were given by an authority figure rather than any other volunteer. The experiments were done at a prestigious institution. The authority figure was present in the room with the subject. The learner was in another room. The subject did not see other subjects disobeying commands. Stanley Milgram has pointed out that obedience as a human characteristics that may very well be in each and every one of us. These experiments shown us that ordinary people will go to any length to be subservient to an authority figure no matter the moral dilemma. Next, the Stanford prison experiment. Unlike the Milgram experiment, which studied the obedience of individuals, in the year 1971, Stanford prison experiment studied the behavior of people in groups and in particular the willingness of people to obey orders and adopt abusive roles in a situation where they were placed in the position of being submissive or dominant by a higher authority. In the experiment, a group of volunteers was divided into two groups and placed in a prison, with one group in the position of playing prison guards and other group in the position of prisoners. In this case, the experimenters acted as authority figures at the start of the experiment, but then delegated responsibility to the guards, who enthusiastically followed the experimenters' instruction and in turn assumed the roles of abusive authority figures, eventually going far beyond the experimenters' original instruction in their efforts to dominate and brutalize the prisoners. At the same time, the prisoners adopted a submissive role with regard to their tormentors, even though they knew that they were in an experiment and that their captors were other volunteers with no actual authority other than being role played in the experiment. The Stanford experiment demonstrated not only obedience of the guards to the experimenter and the prisoners to both the guards and experimenters, but also high levels of compliance and conformity. The next experiment is Hoffling Hospital experiment. Both the Milgram and Stanford experiments were conducted in the experimental circumstances. In 1966, psychiatrist Charles K. Hoffling published the results of a field experiment on obedience in the nurse-physician relationship in its natural hospital setting. Nurses unaware they were taking part in an experiment, were ordered by unknown doctors to administer dangerous doses of a drug to their patients. Although several hospital rules disallowed administering the drug under the circumstances, 21 out of 22 nurses would have given the patient an overdose of medicine. Therefore, it is clear from the above three experiment, in everyday situations, people obey orders because they want to get rewards, because they want to avoid the negative consequences of disobeying, and because they believe an authority is legitimate. In more extreme situation, people obey even when they are required to violate their own values or commit crimes. People justify their behavior by assigning responsibility to the authority rather than themselves. People define the behavior that expected of them as routine. People don't want to be rude or offend the authority. People obey easy commands first and then feel compelled to obey more and more difficult commands. This process is called entrapment. To conclude, in this module, we discussed the areas of social influence such as conformity with related experiments, compliance and its factors, obedience and the related factors, and experimental studies on human obedience. Thank you, learners.